Uh, right, comrades, welcome to the meeting of the Workers' International Network. I'd like to just start by saying that some of our regular attenders are unable to be here today because they're still attending the second day of the founding conference of Britain's new mass left party. I myself am just back off the train now, having yesterday attended its first day. And if the conference ends with a successful outcome, and that's something which is not guaranteed, but if so, this event could prove to be a world changing landmark. And next week, our meeting will be devoted to a first hand report back from two of our delegates at the conference. Today, in addition to regular attenders from Britain, Europe, the USA, and elsewhere, we have specially invited comrades from all parts of India. There are comrades who are here now and comrades that we've invited from Mumbai, from Delhi, from Kerala, from Hyderabad, from Kanpur and other parts of Uttar Pradesh. And we've received apologies from the leading militant trade union leader, Ashim Roy, who was unable to come, but he sent his apologies. He's unable to come because he is currently in transit. And we, of course, we welcome contributions and reports of their experiences from all of these comrades. We've also invited comrades from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Indonesia, the Philippines, and I hope they too will contribute their experiences because the whirlwind of revolt is sweeping the entire region. And we're very privileged to have Comrade Maya John here, who will show its impact on the world's number five economy, India. And now Maya is somebody who is already known to us. She has spoken to us on previous occasions, and she's also widely respected in far broader circles as a leading campaigner for the rights of women, of students, of farmers and agricultural labourers, and of course of the working class. So, comrade, I invite you to speak now for around 25 minutes, if that's okay, and we'll open it up to questions and discussion. So over to you, Maya, and very welcome.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Um, I thank comrades of Workers International Network for again giving me this opportunity to be part of a discussion that they have, envisaged in terms of deliberating on the realities of the political landscape in India, and of course the tasks ahead for a reinvigorated left. Um, now, I did the kind of, requests that came from Win, and I understand, that the reason why, this session has been thought of is precisely because, we have seen various protests, to the extent of full-scale rebellions, in this region of South Asia, and I have spoken on certain of these movements, such as in the case of Sri Lanka, in the case of Nepal also. But my larger concern and, intervention has been that, while these kind of uprisings trigger hope, they trigger a certain euphoria. And some of these movements, have a signaling of that they've somewhere got trapped very soon as they unfolded in status quo. And this is what, of course, therefore pushes us, to engage very closely with the composition of these uprisings, these movements, and thereby the ability of the left to steer these movements beyond, them being mere rebellions to actually becoming a revolutionary change. So it's within this, larger, template that I will, of course, the trajectories that one sees in India and the possibilities that one sees in India and the tasks ahead that one, obviously understands lie ahead for the left. As participants here must know, the current ruling dispensation in India is a right-wing government led by the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, in alliance with several smaller all India and provincial level political parties. And this alliance is known as the National Democratic Alliance, NDA. This NDA government is enjoying a third term in office. Notably, within the federal political structure that we have in India, the BJP, has won many provincial level, elections as well in recent years. And we find that, in comparison to the BJP, the opposition parties are governing a much smaller share of provincial or state governments. And these, opposition governments are constantly being heckled by the NDA. Federal government, given the much wider jurisdiction and resource mobilization available to the federal or the central government in India. So we've seen in the past 11 years under the present ruling, dispensation, growing misuse of institutions, as well as a general repressive crackdown on different social movements. And of course, we are seeing a slew of criminal cases being filed against many leaders and activists from different shades of the left, criminal cases against progressive scholars, journalists, writers, poets, lawyers, and so on. And many of them are actually languishing in jail under trials. So there's, of course, a growing, frustration, about these developments. And many, of course, see elections in India, be it, the general election, all India level, or, local elections, as a crucial opportunity, for safeguard country's constitutional framework and her institutions. Now, ironically, I believe that such views really overlook that the present, ruling bloc has come to power by primarily using the electoral route, the electoral system, enshrined in the provisions of the Indian Constitution and the working of the very same Constitution and the established institutions in the country. Of course, when I highlight this point, I'm not, dismissive of the need for, a cause for alarm. There is. Capitalizing on the electoral machinery of the country and combining this with the regular use of stormtroopers from multiple Hindu majoritarian mass organizations, and particularly the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, the ruling bloc in India has facilitated the deepening of a totalitarian system in the country. Now, if you've noticed, I've consciously used the term deepening of a totalitarian system, indicating that the crisis has been brewing for some time now, and it's not a recent development of the last 10, 11 years. Indeed, the aforementioned tendency of electoral autocracy, as I would call it, has a much longer history. Essentially, what I would like to draw attention to is that the current ruling regime, the BJP led government, in many ways is not, is not very different from the earlier Congress governments that enjoyed state power for many decades. It is just that at this juncture, the opposition to this particular government, the BJP-led government, is proving onerous, more difficult, due to the influence and interventions of the mass Hindu majoritarian, mass organizations, particularly, I call this phenomena the growing tide of Sanghism, drawing on the word Sangh from the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Let me therefore just, begin with further highlighting in historical terms a context, the larger context, which can help us understand the exact nature of the electoral, parliamentary system and state formation in India. I believe it will be necessary to do this because it would help make more sense, help us make more sense of the existing ground realities and trajectories that exist. I would then, of course, proceed to outline the specific challenges and the scope that lies for our concerted efforts to bring about revolutionary change. Now, quickly, in terms of the eve of independence from British colonial rule, this is around 1946, let's remember that the Congress Party won the Provincial Legislative Assembly election which the British conducted. And it was an election based on property criterion. So very small percentage of people, and that too in British India, actually voted in the election. What unfolded, therefore, was what we can call nothing but a transfer of power to the Congress over this period of 1946 to 1947. The Congress essentially, went on to dominate what is known as the Constituent Assembly, the one chamber or unicameral legislature that framed the Indian Constitution. And this assembly also acted as the interim government till the first general election was held in the country in a phase-wise manner from October 1951 to February 1952. Now, this election, the general election of 1952, again, the Congress won, and it went on to enjoy nearly 25 years of state power, as a federal government, till it was briefly dislodged by a broad alliance of oppositional forces known as the Janta Party. This was in the 70s. Now, overall, the larger trend of incumbent serving governments being returned to power, like previously the Congress governments, reveals not only the weaknesses of opposition parties, including that of the parliamentary left, be it the Communist Party of India, the Communist Party of India Marxist, or the CPI-ML, Communist Party of India Marxist-Leninist, but also the deep-seated problems with the overall electoral representative system in India. Long-term trends, of elections in the country reveal the striking fact that despite the larger majority voting against the incumbents, the working of the electoral system is actually preventing people from deposing, these incumbents from power. So in the 18 general elections, 18 general elections conducted between 1952 and 2024, have secured continuity for incumbent, that's serving governments, in nearly 2/3 of the cases, while in just about 1/3 cases, there has been a regime change. A similar pattern, it can be seen at the provincial level or state level assembly elections as well. Further, parties voted into power and have been able to form, the government, have never touched even 50% of vote share in a general election in India since 1951-52, first general election. So the skewed modus operandi of the electoral system in India, based on what is known as the first past the post principle, renders crores of electors as defeated people. The defeat of candidates who trail behind winning candidates in a constituency, sometimes with very small margins, translates into the defeat of the larger numbers who believed in other candidates than the one the winner. Interestingly, right from the formative years, since independence, not only have we seen this electoral machinery, play itself out, we've also seen a very dismal record of the Indian state engagement with civil society. And this includes the glorified, Nehruvian era as well. For example, a case that comes to mind is the poet Majroor Sultanpuri, who was jailed in 1949 for 2 years for reciting a poem at a mill workers' meeting that criticized Nehru. Further, the nascent nation state under the Congress is known to have deployed the Indian Army to repress one of the biggest peasant movements of the 20th century, the Telangana movement, led by the undivided Communist Party of India. Ironically, the assistance of the US was also crucial in the defeat of this huge communist, rebellion. Moreover, the Indian state upheld the status quo of property, privilege, position, prestige. And this is evident in the compromised nature of land reform endeavors in the post-colonial era, and the dragging of feet on the curtailment of the economic and political might of the feudal Indian princes. The Indian princes held on to their privy purses, their personal wealth, till well into the 1970s, when they were actually attached through a separate government legislation. And even today, the former Indian princes are huge landlords with palatial properties from which they earn income through tourism, rent, etc. Moreover, I'd say that the Indian state's protection of private property and privilege in terms of the model of economic planning was envisaged and rolled out since the 1950s is evidence of, what we can see as, the protection and upholding of property and privilege by the state. Now, the model of economic planning left ample room for consolidation of private capital in several sectors within, of course, the larger or under the larger rubric of state regulation of the economy. We don't have much time to go into this. Maybe we can revisit it later during Q&A. In continuation, let me say with this about capital consolidation in India in the post-colonial decades, under, the aegis of what many scholars, social scientists call a developmental state in India. Let us now just, jump a little bit and look at the very immediate current conjuncture that we are in, which is defined by many, again, in the academia, in activist circles, as the neoliberal moment or the neoliberal turn. A term used to highlight three broad tendencies in the political economy, which are connected by the overall goal or objective of cost saving, namely less state, more market, and more individual responsibilization of citizens. However, I put in a word of caution here. The use of terminology or a concept like neoliberalism is something that needs to be qualified, and it's best seen in the context of the specificities of different parts of the world. We shouldn't end up conflating the experience of the global north with the global south. I'd say the grand retreat of the state, as evidenced in the global north, quote unquote global north, cannot be easily generalized to the post-colonial economies of the so-called quote unquote global south, where, debates on state formation have revealed that state intervention has tendentially lagged behind in matters of state welfare. The Indian state has never spent a lot on the social sector services when compared to the exponential growth in the demand for such services, the needs for such services. Given the widening gap, therefore, between demand and supply for things like education, health, etc., successive governments in India have pushed through measures that simply allow for greater penetration of private capital in these domains like education, health, and so on. The corollary has been the persistent decline in per capita, that's per person, government allocation of funds towards these services, and the rising out-of-pocket expenditure by the common masses. Now, this apart, the era of what I'd call competitive, or what many people call competitive federalism, has also accompanied, this conjuncture of liberalization of the Indian economy. Now, given that the federal structure has been, pushing the provinces or the states within India to maintain independent sources of revenue and to control their finances, the process of economic liberalization has nurtured intense competition between, different state governments for attracting foreign and domestic investment or capital in their own individual states. Which has, of course, been a process that has been accompanied by the steady dilution of statutory labor laws by various, provincial or state governments, either by amending the laws within their state, labor laws within their state, or by resorting to a route of special ordinances and executive orders which allow these state governments to bypass, the debate in the state legislature, so they won't actually take the legislative route. So in other words, the period, let's say from, the late 80s, 1990s, has witnessed the process of what many call deregulation, which is unfolded, or the retreat of the state, which is unfolded in the form of competitive federalism. What I'd, of course, like to now spend some time on is in terms of, workers and peasant movements in India in these, important conjunctions. Now, the recent peasant and farmers movements, we have seen, and I have shared this understanding in an earlier session of organized by WIN in April 2025, if I'm not wrong. I just highlight that when you look at these movements in recent times of peasants and farmers in you do see a very concrete dominance of what we call rich farmers. And we see, the might of rich farmers in India in terms of them being able to wrest crucial concessions from the system. And recently, we saw the much celebrated farmers' movement against the 4 draconic farm bills, and these proposed legislations were rolled back due to the might of a sustained movement. The threat, of course, continues to loom in terms of the effort to bring in the legislation, nevertheless, by this government, BJP-led government. The movement of peasants and farmers against the 4 farm bills, in its various phases, this movement revealed the dominance of the rich farmer lobby. If we look particularly at the demands that got foregrounded, and it reflected a sidelining of the demands of poor peasants and agrarian workers. If we look at, of course, the other domain of very important social movements, as workers' movements in the country. Now, at one level, we have seen what some of us identify as a vernacularization of labor politics in the country, wherein labor issues are, congealed behind, they are raised under the guise of various identities, such as, gender, caste, community. And on the other hand, you have this domain of labor politics, which is what we identify as mainstream labor trade union movement, which, unfortunately, remains concentrated in the upper segments of the labor market in India, where the ambit of the protected labor legislations of the country apply. And this is just about 3% of the workforce where, the organized mainstream trade union movement is anchored. So that means that, mainstream unionism exists within a sea of deprivation, within a sea of workers who are trapped in the lower rungs of the labor market, and on those, kind of work situations where the labor laws of the country do not actually even apply. And I think because of this kind of, situation where you have such a large scale deprivation and precarity and only a small island of workers being able to, still protect some of their basic labor rights, because of this very disbalanced picture, you can also understand why it's been easy for this regime to push through the legal, the legal enforcement of the 4 labor codes, which they have been, drafting and since 2019. So, the lack of adequate opposition is also because of this stumbling block, that we've seen in terms of, how little organized trade union organization density we have. The segmentation is also important to recognize because, we are deliberating ultimately on tasks ahead for the left on strategy. And it's very disturbing to find that, in India, 50% of the lower rungs of the population earn just rupees 5,930. That is equivalent to about 50 pounds or less than 50 pounds per month or less than $66 per month. The next rung of the working population, the next 40%, earns 2.5 times more. So that's around rupees 13,750, or let's say a little less than 57 euros per month. So there's a marked differentiation within the ranks of the laboring poor. And given this kind of, situation, it really brings us to what is, the F situation at this, conjuncture. Given these, challenges on the ground. Now, the parliamentary left, as we know, is currently reduced to one state in terms of, enjoying state power governance, where we know in the state of Kerala, the history of social movements have been such, and their interface with the left have been such that, there has been a significant support base for the left, the CPM in particular, that's been kept intact. The parliamentary left has, of course, lost ground rapidly in provinces or states like West Bengal and Tripura, where they had held the seat of power for a substantial number of years. Now, whatever it is, be it Kerala, be it left governments in West Bengal and Tripura, there has been visible, deployment of these, left governments of neoliberal policies. So it really does show, duplicity, a double standard in their politics. Now we have the alternative left, meanwhile, which is unfortunately grappling with a lot of fragmentation, and in organizational and ideological, terms, there is disarray. The Maoist opposition, for example, has remained restricted to certain pockets, which are now, near extinction due to the massive, repressive measures unleashed by successive governments, and more so current ruling dispensation. Further, the fleeting connection of Maoists with India's working class movement, and their compromise with certain local dominant economic groups as part of their a program of alliance with quote unquote national bourgeoisie, has curtailed their influence and raised questions about their revolutionary capacity to unite different sections and segments of the laboring masses. What I'd like to now just spend a little time on before I conclude is, of course, having highlighted all these trends, it is important to reiterate electoral autocracy, wherein repeatedly the candidates are propelled to the position of ruling over their electors, over people, including the large majority of people, defeated people who did not actually vote for them. And representatives in this system literally become power unto themselves, who represent their constituency more or less as they please. And a major consequence of such absolute power is the entrenchment of anti-labor, anti-women, anti-poor, anti-minority policies, as well as, of course, the intrinsic tendency to misuse state institutions directly or indirectly, and to clamp down on the rights of defeated people, to resist and to oppose. Having said this, what we are witness to presently, I think, not just an electoral autocracy, but a potent combination of Sanghism with electoral autocracy. So here I would, highlight the threat of Hindu majoritarian mass organization, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS. It is the 100th year of the RSS, and we really must, comprehend the nature of its political interventions and its expanding support base. Many tend to conflate the RSS with merely a fascist, platform. But I would say its historical particularities reveal, that in its endeavor to stir totalitarian rule, the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh in India, has evolved very differently from the path of early 20th century models of fascist organizations. Now, Antonio Gramsci, as we know, when laying out the strategy for the left, spoke of the war of maneuver, identified as, direct confrontation, frontal confrontation for attaining major change, such as the capture of state power. He also detailed the strategy of war of position, namely a slow, strategic struggle to build ideological, cultural dominance within a society's civil society. Now, ironically, the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, has emerged as the only organization to emulate the Gramscian paradigm in a true sense, with its concerted investment in different sections of society at the grassroots level. They have spread to different nooks and corners of the society, and among the different sections where communists work, we also have the RSS actively working. To conclude, ultimately, I'd say the challenges of dislodging the ruling dispensation from state power and the corresponding capture of state institutions for its partisan politics is actually just one side to the story. The challenge is also about combating the growing influence of the associated politics of the RSS. Like we saw in the context of, white supremacists who, sought to storm Capitol Hill after Trump's, defeat earlier a few years back. It is expected that an electoral defeat of the BJP, in today's day and age, may as well unleash a coup by a deeply entrenched RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak, backed, mass organization. So this is really about, I'd say, winning back the masses from the hold of, the growing hold of the Hindu supremacist forces like the RSS, you know, all the oppositional forces, I believe, must fight if they want to survive. The left, however, needs to fight so that humanity survives. We must realize that we are, of course, one amongst, several oppositional forces in the country, and we may, find ourselves in a very difficult situation currently. But the point is that we must regroup, re-strategize, refound to meet the challenges and prepare ourselves organizationally and ideologically. I believe that till the time the different oppositional forces, both left and beyond the left, even if we march separately, it's very important that we must strike together. And for that, of course, we need to recognize, the importance of reading movements. Need to engage the the actual social composition of many movements to understand their tenor and texture better. That is very crucial. Otherwise, we might, just be getting carried away by a certain amount of activism or certain kind of activity that's been achieved in certain pockets and read that as where the revolutionary potential lies, whereas it's actually in very different kind of places, in different kind of scenarios, and in very different section of the society, the more vulnerably placed precarious section, that actually the potential to take things beyond mere rebellion to something truly revolutionary and transformative lies. And we have to bring that part of the story, those segments, into the center of the revolutionary struggle. So with these observations, I would like, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maya. That was a very comprehensive and stimulating lead off. Who wants to come in first to the discussion? We have many comrades here from India. Anybody want to continue to contribute? Or comrades, of course, from anywhere. Well, if nobody else does, I'll really raise a few questions. I think, as usual, Maya, you've given a very original and enlightening uh, description of the situation. Some of the things that I think, I mean, I always focus on certain aspects, and perhaps the way that I look at it is a bit has missed something. I don't know, but I think first of all we have to put this in the context of the incredible traditions of the Indian working class, which is a closed book to most people worldwide and even within India itself. I'd say, I mean, part of my interest in India came from the fact when I used to go there I'm talking about the kind of 1980s, well, when I was actually working for the CWI for militant, and I mean, I don't want to go into the whole background to it, but I met workers everywhere. Well, first of all, when I first went there in the late 70s, early 80s, wherever you looked, there was picket lines with red flags and slogans and consciously communist slogans and affiliations. But more than that, many times I came face to face with and discussed with comrades who'd gone through literally life-threatening situations on picket lines. I'd never seen, I mean, obviously comrades will have heard some of this before, but in Kanpur, for instance, where Comrade Asit comes from, and I met him at his family at that time. But people, where there had been massacres of workers, hundreds of workers moaned out for standing on picket lines and objecting to the fact not even for wage increases, but for not having been paid the wages that they were due. People who'd been in factory occupations where the where special police squads armed police squad to be brought in to machine gun into the factory in order to wipe out the inmates. I mean, I could give many examples of this, but the fact is that there was the Indian independence movement in the late 40s was a working class rebellion. It was not due to the saintly pacifism of Gandhi. It was through armed struggle, through mass general strikes, through uprisings, through mutinies in the armed forces, which were, of course, under the officers of the British imperialism, where the navy in Mumbai, the sailors threw overboard the commanders, the British commanders. We've written about this, and there's many things that I've discussed before. But those sort of traditions are there, and there's been mass strikes. There was the upheaval with the overthrow of Indira Gandhi's emergency regime. There was the huge railway strike of the late 70s, where I think, about 2 million workers involved. There was the year-long textile workers strike in the mid 80s or early to mid 80s, which again involved uh, lakhs, that's hundreds of thousands, or even a couple of million participants and so on. Now I know that those that we're talking about past history, as in India, as in many other countries, the working class has become less concentrated, and but nevertheless, we've seen in the recent period, I mean, in the last 5 6 years, we've seen again and again, we've seen general strikes, which I've mentioned this many times, of course, but general strikes of 250 million, that's 25 crore workers. Now, I know these are token strikes; they're just there to let off steam. But the fact that the leaders of the workers' movement needed to let off steam to that extent shows how much steam was building up and how much revolt, fuel for revolt there is. Now, for instance, when we talk about all the uprisings in the region, in Sri Lanka first, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Indonesia, and elsewhere in Bangladesh. Uh, what was the main motive force in most of these? It was mainly from the youth and mainly in protest against the unemployment. Now, the youth unemployment in India is on a massive scale. I mean, the age group of school leavers or student university leavers who are looking for work is I had the figures and I didn't have time to look them up before I came here, but I mean we're talking about over half, maybe 60, 70, 80% of youth in that age group and of that from that background are unemployed, and that is surely it's a the fuel for uprisings like we've seen in the region is there, the combustible material, if you like. Now, of course, even all of those uprisings, they haven't led to socialist revolution, and I'm not trying to pretend that the revolution is easy or that it's coming very soon, but the all that is needed is some kind of political unification, some kind of political program, and that means political organization. You talked about the CPI and the CPIM. No, you don't need to go back into the history of why, but I mean, uh, the CPIM, the Communist Party, Marxist so called, held power in West Bengal for decades. I can't remember, 30 years was it, or something like that, or more. And they've lost it completely. It's gone. And of course, some reforms they were able to introduce, but generally speaking, there's nothing left to show for their rule. In Kerala, we've got a comrade here from Kerala, a very prominent youth revolutionary, and I hope he comes into the discussion. But in Kerala, the CPIM along with the CPI, are in power. They have led the government for some consecutive terms, and I believe that their grip also is loosening, and they're beginning to lose. Of course, they've introduced some reforms. I must, if I can tell one story, I'm sorry to take up time, but just one little anecdote. This weekend, I was in Liverpool for the founding conference of the new Left Party, and I got a taxi to the exhibition centre where the conference was held, and the taxi driver asked me, "Oh, well, why? What's going on?" And I said, "Well, it's a new party, led by Jeremy Corbyn." And he said, "What? Oh, Jeremy Corbyn is building a new party. That's great." And he said, his background, he came from Kerala. And he said, well, I mean, in Kerala, we had a communist government too, and they introduced these reforms and so on. So they've left a mark in terms of reforms that they've introduced. But how is it that they're now, that they're, as I say, that their grip is loosening and that they're likely to leave it? Now, just one or two more questions. I'm sorry I'm going on a long time, but I'm nearly at the end of my contribution on this. But I was interested to hear what Maya said about the RSS. He said that it's no longer, if I understood you correctly, it's still, of course, a very reactionary and deadly threat, but it's no longer a classic fascist movement in the sense that it was in the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s as it was. But I understand that that's correct. But we also have to say that all the fascism has adapted its garb. It has it's presenting a new profile worldwide. It's not the time of the stormtroopers and all the rest and the fascist gangs of Italy. Although I would say in India more than in most of the fascist countries of the West, but in India they are more like that. They still have paramilitary drills. They still present themselves as a physical, if you say, paramilitary force, an army which is dedicated to smashing the working class, and they represent the threats. Now, Modi thought that he was going to win the recent general election with to such an extent that he could then impose a an openly Hindu communal constitution on India, but he didn't. He lost his overall majority. He lost in um, in in his what was his stronghold in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. He lost even in the seat that he made the kind of symbol of what he stood for, the constituency where the Ayodhya temple was built and so on. And in that situation, I think the fact of these massive general strikes is represents a real threat, and of course we also have a real threat. I mean, to his regime. And we also have the peasant movement, the farmers' movement, which Maya referred to, which are massive. I mean, it was something like the peasants' revolt in Britain in the 14th century, in a way, in the sense that it wasn't it wasn't a kind of Naxalite style revolt and seizure of land against the landlords in the rural areas. It was a siege of the capital city, and they besieged the capital city for months on end, and they brought the government to its knees on that. And it may have been led by the better off segments of the agricultural population, but it was not, as I said, a kind of Naxalite anti-feudal guerrilla movement. It was anti-capitalist in its the actual program. If correct me if I'm wrong, was an anti-capitalist program because it was against the laws that the government was trying to impose to force the farmers to sell their produce to capitalist monopolies, and the government was defeated on that. So well, all of those are just points I'm throwing in for the discussion. But above all, I do think we need to keep in mind the powder keg of the unemployed youth, which could be the spark which sets off the explosive power that has been shown in these general strikes again and again and again as I say, of hundreds of millions, 250 million workers. Token strikes though they may be, but they show the potential power that's building up. So sorry to go on for so long, but I hope that that stimulated other comrades to come in to the discussion.
Can I give my response before we take more
Of
comments? It
course,
gets
sure,
difficult to
sure, Maya.
remember. Yeah. Um, let me um, let me begin with your first set of observations. And I would respond by saying that, we really can't seamlessly compare the earlier decades, that you flagged with what we are going through right now in the 21st, century, this conjuncture. And, we really need to see that in terms of in the earlier period, even though the left was, not very electorally speaking dominant, uh, um, its presence in the public arena, in civil society, was much greater than it is as of now today. You know, um, and of course, electorally speaking, today it's even a more dismal situation for the left. So electorally speaking, and in terms of mass politics in civil society, also it's the lowest right now in comparison to the earlier decades you flagged. Um, and what I'd also say is that makes it difficult to uh, uh, you know, necessarily agree with you on the kind of, perception you have even of the earlier decades, and the kind of unionism or the kind of left presence you see. I beg to differ because, while I agree that in the earlier period, the trade union movement, still had its, network, its tentacles were covering a larger mass of, workers, compared to today, where you see mainstream trade unionism, heavily centered and concentrated on more or less, the better protected, what I'd call public sector unit, remains of the public sector unit workers. Um, Now, having said this or having made this qualification, I would of course say that uh, uh, we have to understand that even in earlier times and even today, there are these, parallel trends, which of course I recognize you know, run alongside the mainstream trade union, politics in the country. And here I'm talking about, very interesting trade union possibilities within informal workers, if we call quote unquote informal workers, who typically, organized could not easily organize in workplaces which were very fragmented and small, but organized on different, levels through neighborhood trade unionism, etc. So there have always existed these possibilities. As of now, in the conjuncture that we are in the 21st century, those parallel trends are again at their lowest level, and they need to be reinvigorated, resurrected. Having said this, the other set of comments that I have in response to what you have painted as a picture of trade union workers' politics in India over the past few decades. Of course, no one denies that there were these big strikes, that you see some very militant, economic struggles of India's workforce. But then again, I would say that yes, you have a railway strike, 1974. You have many other strikes. And even today, you have some important strikes in strategic industries. But these have not had what we call a larger spillover effect on the larger working class in India. So it has been a militancy, a trade union militancy, which initially had a slightly broader base in terms of trade union density, which has over the last few years shrunk. So trade union density has actually come down in many ways, right? It's becoming even more difficult to organize sustained collective action, also because of the use and deployment of criminal law against, labor action. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the, earlier struggles and struggles today also, trade union struggles, which we are identifying as very militant ones, have not spilled over to provide the same kind of wages, the same kind of benefits and protection to the other sections of the workforce, sometimes in the same industry, and these challenges have to be, these realities have to be recognized. Otherwise, we will be replicating the same font, the same template, the same mistakes, where the left has concentrated most of its energy and creativity in basically creating an enclave, a privileged enclave of workers who are able to claim their dearness allowance, who are able to claim benefits of health benefits and other, regular increase in wages. Whereas the larger sea of workers around them, very often linked to the same industry, do not see a similar situation unfold for them in their work relationship, in their work contract. Actually, I've seen, unfortunately, very militant struggles translate into a section of the workforce being able to then draw what we call premium wage, which never spills over to the larger section of India's working population. I would say also that, this is an argument that I'm making because I am seeing as a trade union, it's a situation where you have workers in India who are earning 4,000-5,000 rupees per month. And I also gave you these figures earlier when I said about 50% of the lower rungs of the Indian population earn just less than 50 pounds per month, And at the same time, the same country, right, and sometimes in the same sector or industry, you have workers who are earning much more than that. So if we take 4,000 or 5,000 rupees per month, and then says another worker is earning 50,000 rupees. So it's multiplied, right? And so what we need to recognize is that see the point that within the working class there is what we call heterogeneity. Workers are distributed around different income groups, different identities. We have a section which is, enjoying certain benefits, and there's a large majority which is not. And it's about, of course, organizing the large majority, which is not in that ambit of remaining benefits that have been successfully over the years wrested from the system. I would make a connection here with our larger concern in revolutionary, politics, the debates on revolutionary politics, that, it's important for us to see how very often we see a lot of, excitement in these movements that are emerging. And I'll draw on this, very well-known fable involving a figure known as Mullah Nasruddin, who was once found, looking for something under a street light, and somebody went up to him. He was a wise man, known as a very wise man. And in the fable, someone goes up to him and say, "What are you looking for, Mullah?" And the Mullah says, "I'm looking for my house key." And the person also then begins to help Nasruddin under, the street light, look for this lost key. And they don't find it. And eventually he turns to the Mullah and says, do you remember where exactly it was here that you dropped it? And Mullah Nasruddin replies saying that, "No, I dropped it somewhere else in that dark spot over there in the distance." But this person guffaws and says that, "But then why are you looking for it here under the street light?" And Mullah Nasruddin says, "Well, because there is light here." So just because we see a certain kind of militancy, we see a certain kind of activism, does not mean that that in itself is where the revolutionary transformative politics germs or seeds actually lie. And I think that's very important to recognize from the point of view of the heterogeneity in India's working class, and also the kind of economism that is intrinsic to a lot of the, struggles that we have seen and are seeing, and the fact that they don't actually spill over, even though they have some interesting signaling effects for the left. In terms of your points about fascism, I am very uncomfortable with the fact that we tend to, see one fascism, a form of fascism, that we saw in the early 20th century, simply reincarnating itself, in another part of the world. And I'm very uncomfortable with this notion of reincarnations or, Avatar 2.0 or Avatar 3.0. I think there are specificities to what is happening here. in the Hindu majoritarian mass organizational front. And I would say in many ways it's a much higher advanced form of fascism, actually, which requires its own terminology, a new name. Why call it fascism? Because that carries its own specificity and bag and baggage of the early 20th century political situation and specificity. So, I'm not comfortable with that conflation, and I am looking for an alternative terminology to identify what's happening here in terms of the Hindu right wing's mass organization work and influence in the civil society. With respect to your point about the BJP and its Modi and the performance of the BJP. Yes, I also wrote on the 2024 general election, and we had another win meeting shortly after the general election of 2024. And you remember that, many of you may remember that discussion. I did say that it was a dent in, of course, the ruling bloc's claims of, having consolidated its support base in a major way. Given the economic ruination of a larger section of the Indian population, many people voted for the opposition. It was a divided opposition vote, and we follow the first past the post principle of election. So the BJP could still come back to power. So I recognize that point, but my concern is that we have to also see the situation in terms of how, the BJP has, it may take a hit in certain elections, like the general election of a certain, in terms of its vote share. But then you see how, overall it's making up in terms of the fact that the highest number of legislators, are from the BJP. So across the different legislatures, central and state. And what does that show you? I know there was a lot of euphoria again around the student union elections of JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, one of the biggest public funded universities of the country in Delhi, and which is seen as, quote unquote, a left bastion for many, many years. But, if you see the left come and, sweep the students union election in a university like JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, you have the Bihar elections declared a few weeks later. What's the result showing you there? You're seeing a complete demolition of the opposition in that election, and you're seeing actually the BJP's vote share go up in the case, and its allies vote share go up in the case of Bihar, right? And it's this complete. They single-handedly won that election and demolished the opposition. So we have to see the way in which the situation is evolving very fast, and it is a cause for alarm, and that makes us prepare. We have to prepare accordingly. We have to read the pulse of social movements. We have to prioritize certain ones rather than just, thinking that a few uprisings here and there, a few tendencies here and there are the way to go forward. Not necessarily. We have to dig deeper. We have to strengthen many of the movements, and we have to also understand the social composition. What are the demands which certain movements prioritize? Which are the demands which are sidelined? And therefore, accordingly, the left has to evolve its strategy. The farmers' movement is hence one where, again, I see, yes, so they had a long sit-in and they so-called, sat on Delhi's borders for a long time and, put pressure on the regime to, revisit the farm laws. But ultimately, what's the pulse? What's the tenor and texture of that movement in terms of its demands? And finally, what was granted also by the Indian state reflects that here you have a rich peasantry. Its lobby is calling for a certain share of the market, and it's competing with the commercial, elites' claims on, on market and profit. And it's a tussle on those issues, the issues of agrarian workers' wages, right? The issues of, poor peasantry who don't benefit from, minimum support price, legislation, because poor peasants are ultimately, as I shared in my earlier presentation in a WIN meeting in April in 2025, are selling their produce to rich farmers who are never going to give them the minimum support price of the market as declared by the government, but much lower prices. So MSP, minimum support price, is not even an issue on agenda for a large section of India's marginal poor peasants. So where were those sections of the peasantry's demand? And have we done enough to anchor their issues as the left in the forefront of a movement against state policies by this regime. So this would be my immediate responses. Thank you. And clarification.
Yeah, thank you. Right, how many comrades want to come in? The comrades from all parts of India here. Welcome your contribution, and comrades from everywhere. There are many lessons from the issues that we've been discussing here. Yeah, Comrade Roy from South Africa.
Unmuting. Yeah, India is South Africa has some ties with India, but it's the complexities of India are really way beyond a lot of what we understand. The analysts that we try to follow and pick up on the news indicate to us that India is punching at the level of becoming one of the top powers in the world economically and so on. We've had the tech industries in the past, and in recent years we've been told that the motor industry is fairly big. What seems to be, and in recent times, and I might be off the topic, but I think of interest to me would be what would be the geopolitical situation or the geopolitics of India. We have the possible competition with China. There is that angle. I'm looking at the kind of deals that Modi is probably making with Trump. The his participation in BRICS, in the G20 summit, which happened recently in South Africa, where incidentally Modi is seen as a popular leader in India, and unfortunately the middle class Indians here who are really South Africans, South Africans of Indian extraction, tended to fate Modi and sing and dance for him here. So there's all of that, and in that context, I wonder if you'd be able to, Maya, shed some light for us on the geopolitics, the possible competitions, the deals, the military bases that Modi might be allowing Trump or the Americans, just to give us an idea, a little bit out of India, what ramifications these have with what the elites in India are doing on the international or on the world scale. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Dominic.
Yeah, John.
Sorry, John.
Yeah, what the speaker has said, I think, is reminiscent of what happened in Britain over a century ago. I believe that what's his name? Engels wrote against the ideas that you had in, if you like, an aristocracy of labour in Britain, ignoring the workers who were semi-skilled or unskilled, and the fact that the capitalists would be working to break up, if you like, their skills and, making it into mass production. And I think myself that we've seen the strikes that developed in the late 1800s, of dock workers, of match workers, and of other workers. And it just was reminiscent of that and the need for workers' unity. The other thing is, with regard to poor peasants, the idea of selling their produce to rich peasants or rich farmers, to be more accurate, because they're not peasants, it seems to me to be, I think, as the speaker said, a bit ludicrous, because they're never going to get the true value of their produce. But the idea of setting up cooperatives that would buy in and be controlled by the peasants the poor peasants. To then sell their produce on the open market is, I think, another thing that should be perhaps explored and propagated. I know from my own background, being from my parents coming from Ireland, a very rural part of Ireland, where you had poor farmers and poor fishermen, that there is a real opposition in many cases to any form of cooperative movement, that they see themselves as being independent. I just thought I'd throw those, ideas into the mix, because I think the lessons of history from Britain are rich, and should be looked at, in India. So I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Right. Any other comrades ready to come in now?
Could I respond to these three that have come
Yeah.
before I again forget?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm responding to a comment in the chat, actually, Roger. This is from someone, Akhil AS. So, many of us here do not believe that a revolutionary communist party presently exists in the country, in India. There are groups, not a party per se. And of course, therefore, the need is very keenly felt for, of course, building of and uniting of forces. So, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns, it was a period where many of us took the effort to resurrect an all India coordination committee of communists, a legacy that goes back a couple of decades earlier. And the point is that such endeavors where we are coordinating and we're trying to build this larger platform, united platform, it is again driven by this agenda of bringing the mass of workers who are in that overexploited condition to the center of the center stage of really making them the priority and their issues the priority of a resurrected movement of workers led by communists in India. So that's really the thrust of any, I would say, and that needs to be the way forward for any effort at a true alliance of communist organizations. Now, with respect to the other question that came, regarding India, I mean, a friend from South Africa, I would say, right now the ruling elites in India are thoroughly confused in terms of, how to position themselves vis-a-vis the US and US imperialism. Now, of course, there's this pull where they want to be with the US, right? And of course, that is more or less in the template of, being a junior partner, and mind my words, junior partner, right? In this larger template of US imperialism. Whereas the US, of course, is pushing down very hard, and its endeavors, of course, to reduce Indian, economic and political elites to mere agents, agents of its imperialist agenda. So there is, of course, an interesting tussle here: agent or junior partner, and I would say that for the left, the communist left, therefore, the challenge is, of course, continuously exposing and building and sustaining the opposition to the military dominance of the US and its allies, the dominance of the US dollar and the havoc it's paying, particularly in terms of facilitating the appropriation of labor, cheap labor from countries like India, its appropriation by this grand alliance of economic elites, globally speaking, this grand alliance, imperialist alliance of economic elites. And I've written about this. I would, request Comrade Roy Chetty to I'll share the link in the chat box in a few minutes. A piece that I wrote on the Gaza genocide, where I talked about, and I hold on very strongly to this understanding of the need for a subaltern internationalism. So we really need to take the country's laboring masses, the world's laboring masses, right, beyond the template of nation state, right? And it's really towards, building that internationalism, that subaltern internationalism, that we can actually, pose an effective opposition to US imperialism, backed by its various, dangerous allies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, John from Mumbai.
Hi. I am wondering whether we are, when we talk in terms of mobilizing the worker, quote unquote, the problem is right now the nature of the worker, what we call the working class, that itself does not conform, especially in India, to any of the standard norms which our ideologies and all provide for. And therefore, the left parties and all are totally at sea. And they will continue to be at sea if they're not. Maybe if they try to follow what Dominic Byrne was talking about, okay, look at the places where production is actually getting morphed into something different from the old taylorized, capitalist system, right? And for example, if we consider the kulaks, the rich farmer is the kulak, and we are still in some earlier mode of production, right? And then we talk of the small farmer and the 2-3 acre farmer who has, as a part of a cooperative, or it's a part of, or the woman who is a part of the self-help group, and they are all over the place. And all these kind of trends that have been there have been usurped and taken over by the corporate system. For example, the SHGs have been totally taken over. And they have been taken over because, even in a place like Kerala, because the left has not been able to provide an alternative ideology to the banking system, to the money system, to the way in which Adani can put his money, in different safe havens and buy off a whole range of Bombay, whole part of Bombay, and then say tomorrow, this is what it is. So till we have an understanding of how like the gig workers, they're now the rising class, I'd say rising working class. And they are in a position to consider working in a certain economy, in a cooperative economy, perhaps in an IT economy also. And there is an alternative to there, but I don't see us taking that kind of a thing seriously. Thank you.
Right, any other comrades? There's many comrades here who've got both a real understanding, a grasp of the history of the working class internationally, and there are many, many comrades here who particularly know very much the struggles of workers in India and the political organizations of the Indian working class. Please don't feel shy to come into the discussion.
So responding to my friend
Comrade
from
Asif,
Kerala.
sorry. Well, can we try to encourage more comrades to come in, and you reply after 2 or 3, if you don't mind. If nobody else wants to come in, then of course,
sure,
you're very welcome. But Asif, did you have your hand up?
Yes. I'm Comrade Maya is very described. So many times we described the future, and last time from the 47 to now. But I want to know that in present time, the central government effective the new labor laws from this month, 21st November. So new labor laws is very bad because the mainly higher political willpower so issued to the central government for the workers, which is the shows that the workers welfare for the workers in labor laws, but it is not the correct. This is not correct because the exploited workers and unorganized sectors is how much developed in India. So I think that we are very crucial condition. We are fighting against these new labor laws. But I want to know that Comrade Maya and Comrade Rai and also Comrade Roser, which way in this in present condition, we are fighting, but in this time, then central organization of the left, which has a INTAC, CITU, ATAC, etc. They are not showing the against the government, but only strike last 35 years against the economic policy, against the Indian politics. I don't know that. What is the way of the revolutionary position in perspective in India? So I want to know. We are. I'm not tired, but I'm hopeless because we see that this is not a good future for the workers and the not good future for the young generation. So I think that is Gen Z. So very crucial condition. They are unemployed. So how to possible in present time the revolutionary ways in present time, is it correct or not? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Asit. Asit is an active trade unionist in Kanpur, which has it's one of the poorest areas in India, but it's also got rich revolutionary traditions going back a century or more. Any other comrades willing to come in? I don't want to put you on the spot, Akhil, but Maya did take up one point that you made in the chat. Why don't you come into the discussion? Comrade Akhil is from Kerala.
Sorry, Roger, can you repeat? Your voice broke. I think my internet
Oh,
wave. Could you repeat?
no, I was just encouraging other comrades to come in, including Akhil, because you referred to something that a point that he made in the chat. But any other I'm not, I mean, anybody, please do come in. We have comrades here with huge amount of experience, particularly of the Indian class struggle. So please don't feel shy to come in. Well, if nobody is ready, I want to make a very quick couple of points, which maybe will stimulate further discussion. Comrade Meyer, the points you made are really enlightening, and you've given us a lot of interesting details and commentary. I would like to say, with all due respect, that we have to be careful not to allow details to obscure the main facts and the main motive forces of what is going on. I mean, what if we look at India, stepping back a bit and looking at the processes that are going on there, what do we see? The first thing I think is the massive, huge extent of the polarization of wealth. It's something that we see, of course, everywhere, It's in USA, in Britain, in Europe, an absolutely almost immense concentration of wealth in the hands of a tiny handful of a plutocracy. We see that there. We see that, for instance, that there are, I think, I can't remember the number. I think it was at least half a dozen Indian capitalist tycoons who are on the Forbes 40 richest list, which is the famous list of the wealthiest people in the world. I know that on the when we look at the question of the grotesque wealth accumulating among the billionaires of the world, there was a couple of years ago, or I think last year, there was an assessment made that the world's first trillionaire, that's somebody with $1 million, that the first trillionaire would be Elon Musk. And since then, he's actually achieved that. He's just made a deal by which his companies have promised him that he will actually get $1 trillion of wealth, which is an unimaginable sum. But the reason I'm making this point is that number two in the list of projected trillionaires was Ambani, one of the plutocrats in India, the world's second trillionaire expected in the next couple of years. There's that kind of polarization, and at the same time, apart from a very small section of the population, an immiseration and a pauperization of a huge a huge segment of the Indian population, which of course Maya has referred to, and of course it's not absolutely universal. There's not a kind of there's not pauperization of the entire workforce and the entire non-billionaire class, but there is, generally speaking, the share of the working class in what is produced is shrinking and shrinking to unprecedented levels, and the number of people, as Maya has shown, the number of people who are suffering absolutely intolerable poverty, or or unlivable conditions is actually that of crores, of tens of millions of people, even hundreds of millions of people, and that's an explosive force. Now, secondly, you look at the unemployment situation of youth. When you have youth unemployment on the scale that I talked of, as I said, something like, I can't remember the exact figures, but among the certain age group of recent graduates, the unemployment rate is something like 70 or 80%. Maybe I may have got that wrong, but it's something like that. It's well over 50 or 60% in any case. And that has been the motive force. That's been the spark which has set off uprisings throughout the whole region and throughout other regions of the world too. But in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Indonesia, in the Philippines. We've had comrades from all of those countries speaking at our meetings, and it's the same situation there. Yes, it's not led by the working class at this stage. It's led by young people who've got no hope, who feel they've got no future, and are desperate to try to grasp something so that their lives actually have some kind of meaning. And that is a huge powder keg within India too. That when we add to that this question of the farmers. Now I know they weren't uh, their demands weren't for socialism. They weren't for general political reforms. But they wanted to be freed from kind of servitude to the giant capitalist monopolies, which would have been the case if those laws had gone through. And they defeated them. They defeated them. And all of this, all I'm saying is this: I'm not trying to say. Nobody is trying to say that all of these things show that there's a kind of conscious thirst for socialist revolution. What it shows is that the material is there. as I say, a vast powder keg is there. And what is missing? What is missing is some kind of revolutionary leadership. All it would need. Can you imagine, if it were possible, to imagine a communist force which really was communist, which was not reformist, and which were not accommodated to all kinds of communal and caste and capitalist interests. If you had a force which said which just brought all these things together and mobilized on the basis of those traditions of struggle that I referred to before, how it could transform the situation, and that surely has to be the task, not simply passively to comment on the trends that are happening, including reactionary trends and trends which cut across the potential, but to show, and then you add all that together and you show in the working class. I mean, nobody. I'm surprised that nobody seems to give due attention to the phenomenon that again and again and again there have been 2-day strikes, general strikes, amounting to 250 million, a quarter of I don't know how you would describe that. There's been nothing like it anywhere in the world. Such demonstrations of power, and as I say, I know that these are switched on and off by political and trade union leaders in order to let off steam. But what's important for us is to show what steam there is. Why would people give up? I'm talking about the whole organized working class in trade unions is not much more than I think the biggest estimate I've seen is maybe 90 million. But that's and by some estimates only 20 or 30 million of the working class. But in other words, it's been these 2-day general strikes who involve not just people organized in factories and in workshops and in banks and in offices and all the rest of it. It's been things like street vendors, beady rollers. I mean, I've seen a whole long list. The participation of women has been one feature which was being particularly noted and particularly marked and so on. It's a huge mass of the enslaved population of India which has shown a determination to struggle. Now, they're not communists, they're not Marxists, they don't understand how you to get there, but it shows the potential that is there and the need for revolutionary mobilization. And that's all I'm trying to say. I know I've given you plenty to respond to there, and it's probably quite provocative. But uh, Maya, of course, you're going to have the last word on this, so we're looking forward to hearing what you would say about that. But before I call Maya in, are there any more comrades who would like to contribute to the discussion? Please don't feel shy. Well, Maya, I think it's over to you now.
Thank you, Roger. I do understand. I do relate to, the concerns that you, Roger, for example, and many others here in the meeting have expressed. Um, and I can also understand where, uh, your hopeful, optimism also somewhere of the kind of struggles that we recently see arises from. But again, I would appeal to everyone here, all comrades here. You know, yes, a revolutionary leadership is missing, and that is an important factor, as highlighted by Comrade Roger. But we have to remember that uh, it's not just that. It's not just, a missing revolutionary leadership. It is about the social base for a revolutionary leadership to emerge and sustain itself has to be equally there. And that social base, I think, and the question of revolutionary leadership go together, and they have to be worked out, they have to be thought about in, a dialectic way. And I think if you just you'd also see why, I, for example, have shared in this meeting the concerns about the font and the texture of many movements, which we're reading as anti-systemic, um, and the kind of struggles which, like you're saying, an all India strike, for example, as signaling something majorly transformative. I have certain doubts about that. And it's because of the nature of which large section of India's working class is still outside that, influence and that form of politics in real terms. But let me clarify further. Colleagues, just, before the last comment from Roger, also, talked about, how the left doesn't seem to be able to reinvent itself according to the changes in the workforce. And, a friend from Kerala mentioned, how we have gig workers now and all these new workforces coming into the picture. I just like to, say here that again, the left is not a homogeneous bloc. When we're saying the left doesn't, is not evolving, is not reading the situation necessarily, and rethinking strategy, the point is there are different segments in the left. And while some of your concerns and even mine are valid for a section of the left, there is still, as I said, communist groups which have the potential to of course take things forward. The second point that I'd like to highlight in response to John's observations is that we have to remember that the working it's not that we are in the service of different sections of workforces like gig worker or this worker or that worker. We have to, as communists, think in terms of what is in the and how do we evolve a politics that encapsulates the collective interest of the class, of the working class. And that means we're able to work actually with the real Marxist concepts of exploitation. So therefore, this emphasis in my presentation here before all of you is that we need to, when we're rethinking our strategy and regrouping, identify where is the social base of that revolutionary mass lie. It is, as Marx and later Lenin in an absolutely fantastic way at the Stuttgart Congress also identified, that it's the overexploited segment which really needs to be the core of our agenda and our politics. Now, Lenin, of course, at Stuttgart was talking in terms of, within the rubric of imperialism and how, workers in the colonies, were being overexploited in some way. Their overexploitation fed into, these bribes that were given to the metropole, the working class in the various metropoles. But now we're seeing that, within a country, within an individual country, there is, this marked gradation within workers. And hence, we have to, deploy what our own, revolutionary ideologues and leaders highlighted in their struggles in the past, which is that we turn to the overexploited segments in each country and ensure that their agenda becomes the weight of the revolution. And we see in them the revolutionary possibilities rather, in every uprising or any manifestation of restlessness that we are currently witnessing. So we have to be very, keen on reading what is the social composition of a lot of these movements and the direction which they can take, and hence situate our, ability to direct the movement, involve ourselves and direct it, or, of course, be critical of it and build the alternative. So thank you. And yes, in terms of assets, very important observation and concern about the labor codes. Precisely, Comrade Asset, the labor laws of the country have been limited, more or less since the inception to a very small segment of the working class here in India, and in more recent decades, it's been reduced to just some 3 to 4% of India's workers are covered by protective labor legislation. So how can we even begin to imagine that the 97% of India's workers who are left and have been left for a long time outside the purview of labor legislation will magically rise up in a very sustained, organized manner against the 4 labor codes which have been legally enforced in this month 2025. Can we expect them just out of mere left propaganda to be ignited into a potent force against the draconic labor laws? No, it requires a very different font of trade unionism to take the center stage. It requires that their material issues and concerns are actually picked up and become central to the organized labor movement. Only then will that kind of resistance position come to so many of the anti-labor policies that this regime has precipitated.
Thank you, Maya. Dominic, your hand is up. Dominic or John?
Dominic, yeah. I think
Dominic, thank you.
I think Maya's overthinking the whole process, because the working class or the lowest paid workers and that are not going to join a revolution because somebody comes out with a chart of saying, we're going to have this rule and that rule and the other rule. They're going to get involved because somebody's going to get up and say, we've got to take on the capitalists and end poverty. And that's the banner that they'll be marching under. And in that process, the workers are going to learn. I mean, you're not going to have everything covered. The working class aren't stupid. Once they get involved in a revolutionary process, like they do in a strike, they'll be coming up with the ideas. It won't be left to the leaders to think everything out and what they're going to do everything. The leadership are going to learn from the base as well about how to struggle and how to work. So I think you can totally overthink that you've got to have everything in a parcel, in a chart on the wall, that we can do all this and that, and when everything's in place, we can then start talking about doing something. By that time, you'll find that you'll be in a concentration camp somewhere. So just think through.
Right. Thanks, Dominic. Anybody else want to come into the discussion? Obviously, the debate will go on. Maya, we'll probably, I'm sure we'll be very happy to invite you again to continue the discussion. I think we're going to see huge movements in India. I don't think it's in any way insulated from the storm that's sweeping the entire region. But let's see, maybe I've overestimated the potential. Maybe also that's something that you haven't seen, Maya. Let's see. Obviously, you know far more detail than I do, but I do think that the general principles that I outlined, I think that they are valid. But the discussion will continue. That's our tradition in WIN, to continue the debates from which we all learn. And so I think we'll leave it to that there. Maya, would you like to have one last word before we close the discussion? Maya?
Sorry, I think my screen froze. I just reiterate that the refoundation of the communist left in India really depends on, the most exploited section of India's working class being prioritized and being, mobilized as the revolutionary force to take things forward, to take us beyond a mere template of a few uprisings, strikes. For a transformative revolutionary politics, it's about re-anchoring, again, in Marx and Lenin's own words, the most exploited segment. And yes, they are restless. They are fighting. They are throwing up. I work with trade unions of the lowest segments of the workforce, such as domestic work, sanitation workers. So nobody is saying that they are just sitting back in helplessness and earning 4,000 or 5,000 rupees and going about their day. There is resistance, but is it being prioritized and is being given the direction and the form that it needs? It's just episodic. So we have to move beyond episodic, overexploited working class segments protests to the more formidable, organized, led by the revolutionary communist left, format of labor politics. So we move beyond enclaves, limited trade union mobilization and density to something more expansive, right? Where actually we'll be able to, in real terms, through consistent organizing of the lowest segments of India's, labor market, the workforce is there, we're actually able to reduce that huge gap in the rate of exploitation. We'll be able to bring up the, the rate of exploitation of, suppose, construction workers, agricultural landless labor, domestic workers. We'll be able to bring it closer to the average rate of exploitation. And those struggles actually are very crucial ones. They are being fought. They need to be intensified and given a more potent, organized form. That's where I'm coming from. And I think that is really be the game changer. And that will really feed into the reinvigoration of the left, the communist left in particular, and what I'd call really translate into a transformative moment. What you're calling, of course, in the WIN meeting, an explosive, moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Maya. I think it's been a very productive discussion. I do think other comrades should not feel so shy about coming into the discussion, because I know there's a huge amount of experience and knowledge contained here. But let's continue the debate, and we're all learning from it. So, comrades, that's the end of the meeting today. I just remind comrades that next week, and this is an invitation to all the comrades here, including comrades who haven't come previously, in Britain this weekend, there was the conference of what could be a new mass party of the working class in Britain. It's not sure whether it will live up to its potential or not. If it does, it could transform the political outlook, not only in Britain, but in Europe and beyond. I myself was there at the first meeting, the first day of the conference yesterday. I came back in order to be at this meeting. There are other comrades who are still there. It was a 2-day conference, and two of the comrades who are delegates to that conference will be reporting back next week. So I invite all the comrades to come and hear their report, because it could really affect how events will develop, not just in Britain, but worldwide. So, comrades, all the best. Hope to see you all next week. Thanks, comrades. Bye bye.
Thank you.